Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Comment below where you're listening from, I would really like to know. Now, let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Haunting Echo. It was on a gloomy Saturday afternoon when I first stumbled upon the old cassette tape. I had been sorting through the clutter in the attic of my recently inherited house, a dilapidated old mansion that once belonged to my great-uncle. Amidst the dusty boxes and forgotten memorabilia, a small, unmarked cardboard box caught my attention. Inside was a single cassette tape, yellowed with age, with the simple yet ominous label, "Play Me." A shiver ran down my spine as I examined the tape. Despite my unease, curiosity got the better of me. I carried the tape downstairs to the study, where an ancient cassette player still sat on a shelf, a relic from another era. The room was dimly lit, shadows playing on the walls as I inserted the tape and pressed play. The tape crackled to life, a static hiss filling the room. At first, there was nothing but silence and the occasional pop and crackle of the old recording. Then, I heard it, my own voice, unmistakably me, having a conversation with myself. I recognized the topic immediately. It was a conversation I had in private just the night before, mulling over my plans for renovating the house. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the implications. How could this tape, clearly decades old, contain a recording of a conversation I had only yesterday? I continued to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. As my recorded voice discussed paint colors and furniture arrangements, a low, sinister laughter began to distort the background, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. I stopped the tape, my hands shaking. This had to be some sort of elaborate prank, but I couldn't fathom who would go to such lengths to scare me. I decided to play the tape again, this time listening more closely for any clues. As my voice played back once more, I caught something I had missed before, faint whispers, barely audible beneath the laughter. They seemed to be repeating a name, but it was too distorted to make out clearly. Determined to uncover the truth, I played the tape over and over, straining to decipher the whispers. After what felt like hours, I finally made out the name, Evelyn. The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. Evelyn had been my great-uncle's wife, a woman who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. Her sudden vanishing had always been a dark stain on the family history, one that no one ever talked about. Could it be possible that this tape was somehow connected to her disappearance? The thought sent chills down my spine. I needed answers, and I knew where to start. The old family records were stored in the library, a room I had yet to fully explore. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the long, dim hallway, the shadows seeming to close in around me. The library was a cavernous room lined with dusty shelves, filled with books and documents dating back centuries. I began my search, pulling out old photo albums and diaries, looking for any mention of Evelyn. After hours of searching, I found a small, leather-bound diary belonging to my great-uncle. As I flipped through the pages, I discovered that his entries grew increasingly erratic in the months leading up to Evelyn's disappearance. He wrote of hearing strange voices and seeing shadows that shouldn't be there, of feeling watched even when he was alone. One entry, dated just a week before Evelyn vanished, stood out. Evelyn found an old cassette tape today, my great-uncle had written. It was labeled "Play Me." She played it, and ever since, she's been different. Distant. Frightened. I fear something dark has taken hold of her. My heart raced as I realized the connection. The tape I had found was the same one that had led to Evelyn's disappearance. Whatever dark force had haunted her was now targeting me. I needed to find out more, to uncover the truth behind the sinister laughter and whispers. As I stood there, the flashlight flickering in my hand, I heard a faint sound from the hallway. It was the same sinister laughter from the tape, echoing through the empty house. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. The presence that had haunted Evelyn was still here, and it was coming for me. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The laughter seemed to follow me as I fled the library, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house felt more oppressive than ever, the shadows deepening, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I decided to visit the local historical society, hoping to find more information about Evelyn and my great-uncle. The historical society was housed in a quaint, old building downtown. The curator, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind but inquisitive elderly woman. When I mentioned my great-uncle's name, her expression shifted to one of concern. "Ah, yes, the old Darnell house," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "There are many stories about that place." I explained the situation, carefully avoiding mention of the supernatural elements. Mrs. Henderson led me to the archives, where she pulled out a dusty file labeled Darnell Family. We spent hours sifting through old documents and photographs, piecing together the history of the house and its inhabitants. I discovered that my great-uncle had been a well-respected man in the community, but after Evelyn's disappearance, he became reclusive, his mental state deteriorating rapidly. One article caught my eye. It detailed a search party organized to find Evelyn after she vanished. The search led them to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, where they found evidence of a strange ritual. The building was later demolished, but whispers of dark practices persisted. My great-uncle had been linked to the site, though no formal charges were ever brought against him. "Do you know where that building was?" I asked Mrs. Henderson, my curiosity piqued. She nodded. "It was on the old Miller estate, now overgrown and abandoned. Be careful if you go there. People say it's cursed." Determined to uncover the truth, I drove to the Miller estate. The area was overgrown with weeds and thick underbrush, the remnants of the building barely visible among the foliage. As I explored the ruins, I found remnants of old candles and strange symbols etched into the stone floor. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. In a hidden alcove, I discovered a small, rusted box. Inside was another cassette tape, labeled Final Message. My hands trembled as I picked it up, a sense of foreboding washing over me. I knew I had to listen to it, but the thought filled me with dread. Back at the house, I inserted the tape into the player and pressed play. The recording crackled to life, and I heard Evelyn's voice, soft and frightened. "If you're hearing this, it means the darkness has taken hold of you too," she began. "I don't know how much time I have left, but I need to warn you. The tape, the laughter, it's all connected to a spirit called Mershel. It feeds on fear and grows stronger with each soul it consumes." My blood ran cold as I realized the enormity of what I was facing. Evelyn's voice continued, explaining that Mershel had been summoned by my great-uncle in a misguided attempt to gain power. The spirit had attached itself to Evelyn, driving her to the brink of madness before ultimately consuming her. "The only way to banish it is to confront it directly," Evelyn said. "You must summon Mershel and speak its true name. Only then can you hope to break free." Her voice faded, replaced by the sinister laughter that had haunted me since I found the first tape. I knew what I had to do, but the thought terrified me. Summoning Mershel meant facing the darkness head-on, risking everything in a bid to end the haunting once and for all. I prepared for the confrontation, gathering candles, chalk, and anything else I might need for the ritual. The house seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as I drew the symbols on the floor and lit the candles. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, as I took a deep breath and called out, "Mershel, I summon you." The temperature dropped sharply, and the shadows coalesced into a dark, menacing figure. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and the sinister laughter filled the room. "You dare summon me?" Mershel hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. I stood my ground, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I know your name, Mershel. I command you to leave." The entity recoiled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. "You are brave," it sneered. "But bravery will not save you." The room shook, and the laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls. I felt a surge of fear, but I knew I had to stay strong. "Mershel, I banish you." I shouted, repeating its name with as much force as I could muster. The entity screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain. Its form twisted and writhed, the shadows dissipating as the room filled with blinding light. I covered my eyes, the intensity overwhelming. When I opened them again, the figure was gone, and the house was silent. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, from the depths of the house, I heard a faint whisper, "It's not over yet." The whisper echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. I realized that Marshall's influence was not yet fully banished. There was something more I needed to understand, something deeper that connected the spirit to my family in this house. Exhausted but resolute, I decided to delve into the darkest corners of the mansion, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. I began my search in the basement, a labyrinthine warren of rooms and storage areas. The air was damp and musty, the shadows long and menacing. I turned on every light I could find, but it did little to dispel the darkness that seemed to cling to the walls. As I moved deeper into the basement, I found a door I had never noticed before, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading further down into the earth. The air grew colder with each step, a palpable sense of dread settling over me. At the bottom of the stairs was a small, stone-walled chamber. In the center of the room, surrounded by old, faded symbols drawn on the floor, was an altar. On the altar lay an ancient book, bound in cracked, dark leather. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten notes and sketches. It was a grimoire, detailing rituals and summoning techniques. Flipping through the pages, I found numerous references to Marshall, describing it as a powerful, malevolent spirit that thrived on fear. The final entry in the grimoire caught my attention. It was written in my great-uncle's handwriting, detailing his desperate attempts to control Marshall. He described a final ritual, one that could bind the spirit permanently but required a great sacrifice. My heart sank as I read the final lines. Only through the ultimate act of courage can Marshall be defeated. The summoner must face the spirit in its true form and embrace the fear. The words filled me with a sense of foreboding. To truly banish Marshall, I would have to confront it in the place where it was strongest, the chamber where it had been summoned. I steeled myself for what was to come, knowing that failure meant losing my soul to the darkness. I gathered my resolve and returned to the main part of the basement, preparing the symbols and materials for the final ritual. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the shadows twisting and writhing as I worked. The air grew colder, and the sinister laughter began to echo through the halls once more. As the last candle was lit and the final symbol drawn, I felt Marshall's presence growing stronger. I stood in the center of the chamber, clutching the grimoire, my voice steady as I began to recite the incantation. The shadows around me coalesced into the dark, menacing figure of Marshall, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. "You dare summon me again?" it hissed, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot defeat me. I will consume your soul, just as I did with Evelyn." I felt a surge of fear but forced myself to remain calm. "Marshall, I know your true name, and I command you to leave this place. You have no power here." The entity laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You are brave, but bravery alone will not save you. Embrace your fear, and you might have a chance." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as I prepared for the ultimate confrontation. "Marshall, I banish you in the name of all that is good and pure. Leave this place and never return." The air crackled with energy as the shadows twisted and writhed. Marshall lunged at me, its form shifting and flickering as it tried to overwhelm me with fear. I stood my ground, repeating its name with every ounce of strength I had. The entity screamed, its voice filled with rage and pain, as the symbols on the floor began to glow with a brilliant light. The chamber shook, the walls cracking as the light intensified. I felt a surge of power, the energy of the ritual flowing through me. Marshall's form began to dissolve, the shadows dissipating as the light grew brighter. With one final, ear-piercing scream, the entity was sucked into the glowing symbols, the air around me stilling as silence fell. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. I knew that Marshall had been banished, its hold on the house and my family finally broken. As I lay there, catching my breath, I noticed something glinting on the altar. It was a locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. Inside was a small photograph of Evelyn, her eyes filled with a sadness that spoke of the horrors she had endured. I took the locket, vowing to honor her memory and ensure that no one else would suffer as she had. Just as I began to feel a sense of closure, the air grew cold once more, and a faint whisper echoed through the chamber. "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. Silent Watcher. It was a cold, dreary evening when I first stumbled upon the hidden room in my basement. I had been living in the old Victorian house for nearly 6 months, and it was on this particular night that a strange draft led me to the far corner of the basement, where I noticed a small, concealed door. It blended seamlessly with the stone wall, almost as if it was never meant to be found. Curiosity piqued, I pried the door open, revealing a narrow, dark staircase descending into the unknown. My heart pounded in my chest as I cautiously made my way down, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder and more oppressive with every step, and an unsettling silence enveloped me, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with what appeared to be countless old photographs. A single, naked bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a ghostly light over the space. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, a sense of dread creeping over me. I picked up the first photograph I saw, my hands trembling slightly. The image showed me lying in bed, asleep, with an eerie, serene expression on my face. My mind raced with questions. Who had taken these photos? And why? As I shuffled through the pictures, I realized they all depicted me in various stages of sleep, spanning years of my life. The horror of the situation began to sink in, my skin prickling with fear. The last photograph in the stack was different from the rest. It was recent, taken in the very room I had been sleeping in for the past few months. In this picture, my eyes were wide open, staring directly into the camera with a look of pure terror. I dropped the photograph, my heart pounding in my ears. Someone had been in my house, watching me, capturing these intimate moments without my knowledge. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned to leave the room. Suddenly, the light bulb flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I froze in place, feeling a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my breath catching in my throat. In the dim light, I saw the faint outline of a figure standing in the corner, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure remained silent, its gaze fixed on me. Panic surged through me as I backed away, stumbling up the stairs. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence was broken by a faint whisper that seemed to echo in the darkness. "You should not have come here," the voice hissed, sending chills down my spine. I reached the top of the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. My mind raced, and I felt the weight of the photographs in my hand. I knew I couldn't stay in the house, but I had to uncover the truth about who or what had been watching me all these years. Sleep was impossible after my discovery. I paced my room, mind racing, the images of those photographs seared into my brain. Every creak of the old house set my nerves on edge, each shadow seemed to hide a pair of watchful eyes. Exhausted but unable to rest, I decided to research the history of the house, hoping to find some explanation for the unsettling photos and the presence I had encountered. The local library provided little comfort. The house had changed hands numerous times over the past century, each owner leaving abruptly without explanation. There were no records of any crimes or tragedies, but the absence of information only deepened the mystery. Late into the night, I came across an old newspaper article that mentioned a reclusive photographer named Elias Graves who lived in the house during the early 1900s. He was known for his eerie, candid photographs of people in their most vulnerable states. Graves had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of unsettling art. I couldn't shake the feeling that Graves and the photographs were connected. As I returned home, the oppressive weight of the house seemed to bear down on me even more. I decided to delve deeper into the hidden room, despite my fear. I needed answers, and I felt compelled to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, I descended the stairs once more. The air was even colder this time, and the silence seemed to thrum with a latent energy. I pried open the wooden panels behind the shelves, revealing a small crawl space. Inside, I found an old leather-bound journal covered in dust and cobwebs. My hands shook as I opened it, the yellowed pages crackling under my touch. The journal belonged to Elias Graves. His entries were erratic, filled with ramblings about capturing the essence of his subjects' souls through his photography. He wrote of a dark figure that guided him, instructing him on how to elicit the perfect expressions of fear and vulnerability. My heart pounded as I read his final entry. The figure has chosen a new subject. It watches her as she sleeps, waiting for the right moment to capture her essence. She will lead it to the final masterpiece. My blood ran cold as I realized Graves had been referring to me. The figure had been watching me, just as it had watched his other subjects. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. I had to get out of this house, but first, I needed to destroy the room and everything in it. If I couldn't escape, perhaps I could at least break the cycle. As I gathered gasoline and matches from the garage, the house seemed to come alive around me. The walls creaked and groaned, shadows danced with malevolent glee. I hurried back to the basement, dousing the hidden room in fuel. The smell of gasoline was overpowering, but I didn't care. I struck a match, watching the flame flicker and dance before tossing it into the room. The fire roared to life, consuming the photographs and shelves with a hungry ferocity. The heat was intense, forcing me back up the stairs. As I reached the top, I heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. The malevolent presence was not pleased with my defiance. I stumbled into the living room, gasping for breath. The house shuddered around me, as if it were trying to expel me. I felt a cold hand brush against my neck, sending a jolt of terror through me. I spun around, but saw nothing. The whispers began again, louder this time, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. "You cannot escape," they hissed in unison, the sound wrapping around my mind like a vice. Panic gripped me as I realized the fire might not be enough to break the hold this presence had over me. I needed help, and fast, before the entity claimed me as its final masterpiece. I fled the house, my mind racing, desperate to find someone who could help me. My first thought was to contact a paranormal investigator. I needed someone who understood the darkness that had taken root in my home. I drove to the nearest town, my eyes darting nervously at every shadow, every fleeting movement in the corner of my vision. I found a small, nondescript office belonging to a paranormal investigator named Dr. Malcolm Ridgway. His reputation preceded him. He was known for dealing with the most malevolent of spirits. I burst into his office, barely coherent, but the urgency in my voice must have conveyed enough. He listened intently, his face growing more serious with every detail I shared. "Your house has a dark history," Dr. Ridgway said, his voice grave. "Elias Graves was known to have dabbled in the occult. It's possible he summoned something that now resides in your home, feeding off the fear and energy of its occupants." I felt a glimmer of hope. "Can you help me get rid of it?" Dr. Ridgway nodded. "I'll need to see the house and perform a cleansing ritual. But be warned, this entity won't let go easily. It will fight to keep its hold over you." We drove back to the house together, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on us as we approached. The fire had burned out, but the air was still thick with smoke and the acrid scent of charred wood. Dr. Ridgway set up his equipment, lighting candles and placing symbols around the house. He began chanting in a low, rhythmic tone, the words foreign and unsettling. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. A sudden, fierce wind whipped through the house, extinguishing the candles. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more substantial. A guttural voice echoed through the room, mocking and cruel. "You think you can banish me?" Dr. Ridgway continued chanting, his voice unwavering. The air crackled with energy, the very walls of the house vibrating with the force of the ritual. I felt a pressure building in my chest, as if the entity were trying to crush me from within. I clutched at my throat, struggling to breathe. Suddenly, the figure from the photographs appeared before us, its eyes burning with malevolent fury. It lunged at Dr. Ridgway, knocking him to the ground. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the oppressive silence returned. I rushed to his side, helping him to his feet. The figure loomed over us, its presence suffocating. "You cannot banish me," it hissed. "I am eternal." Dr. Ridgway's face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "We have to finish the ritual," he said, his voice strained. "It's the only way." We resumed the chanting together, our voices blending in a desperate attempt to expel the entity. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. The house shook violently, plaster cracking and falling from the walls. The oppressive darkness began to lift, the air growing lighter. With one final, defiant scream, the figure dissipated into a cloud of dark smoke, which was sucked out of the house as if by an invisible force. The room fell silent, the atmosphere returning to a semblance of normalcy. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Dr. Ridgway placed a hand on my shoulder, offering a weary smile. "It's over," he said. "The house is cleansed." I wanted to believe him, to feel the weight lift from my shoulders, but something still felt wrong. The photographs were gone, the hidden room reduced to ashes, but the sense of unease lingered. As Dr. Ridgway packed his things, I noticed a photograph lying on the floor, untouched by the fire. It was the latest one, showing me with my eyes wide open, terror etched across my face. I picked it up, a cold chill running down my spine. The image seemed to move, the eyes flickering with a hint of life. I turned to Dr. Ridgway, my voice trembling. "It's not over, is it?" He looked at the photograph, his expression darkening. "No," he admitted. "This entity is powerful. It may have left the house, but it hasn't let go of you." Dr. Ridgway's words echoed in my mind as I stared at the photograph, my fear deepening. The entity had latched onto me, its grip tightening despite our efforts. I couldn't live with this constant terror, I needed to confront it directly. Dr. Ridgway sensed my resolve and, though hesitant, agreed to help me take the fight to the entity. "We need to find its origin," he said. "If Graves summoned it, there must be a way to banish it permanently." We began our search in the ruins of the hidden room. Among the ashes and charred remains, we found another journal, older and more sinister than the first. Graves had detailed his pact with the entity, a malevolent spirit that promised him artistic genius in exchange for human fear. The final entry was particularly chilling. The entity's true name grants control over it. Speak it, and its power wanes. The name, however, was smeared and illegible. Desperation clawed at me as I realized we were close yet so far from freeing ourselves. Dr. Ridgway suggested a seance to communicate with Graves directly, to uncover the entity's name. With no other options, I agreed, despite the inherent danger. We prepared for the seance that night. Candles cast flickering shadows across the room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Dr. Ridgway began the ritual, calling upon Elias Graves to reveal himself. The air grew colder, and a ghostly figure emerged from the darkness, its features twisted in eternal torment. "Why have you summoned me?" Graves' voice was a harsh whisper, filled with anguish. "We need the entity's name," I said, my voice trembling. "Tell us how to banish it." Graves hesitated, his spectral form wavering. "You cannot banish what you have invited," he said. "But the name is the key." Dr. Ridgway pressed him, and finally, Graves relented. "Cipher," he whispered. "Speak the name with intent, and you can weaken it." With this newfound knowledge, we prepared for the final confrontation. Armed with the entity's name, we planned to lure it into a trap and banish it once and for all. The house seemed to sense our intent, the oppressive atmosphere intensifying as we readied ourselves. I could feel Cipher's malevolence lurking, waiting for its moment to strike. The moment came when I stood alone in my bedroom, the photograph clenched in my hand. "Cipher," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "I summon you." The temperature plummeted, and the shadows coalesced into the entity's form. Its eyes burned with hatred, and it lunged at me with a feral growl. I stood my ground, repeating its name with every ounce of strength I had. "Cipher! Cipher!" Dr. Ridgway joined me, his voice merging with mine in a powerful chant. The entity shrieked, its form flickering and wavering under the force of its true name. It writhed in agony, the sound reverberating through the house. The walls trembled, and the air crackled with energy as we continued our chant. "You cannot defeat me!" Cypher roared, its voice a mix of fury and desperation. But we persisted, our voices unwavering. Slowly, Cypher's form began to dissipate, the shadows retreating as its power waned. With one final, ear-piercing scream, the entity exploded into a cloud of dark smoke, which was sucked out of the house by an invisible force. Silence fell, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. Dr. Ridgway and I stood in stunned silence, the weight of what we had accomplished settling over us. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. I glanced at the photograph in my hand, now blank and lifeless. Cypher was gone. Or so I thought. As I turned to thank Dr. Ridgway, a cold breeze swept through the room. The candles flickered, and in the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the truth. Cypher had not been banished completely. It was still there, waiting, watching. Dr. Ridgway caught my eye, his expression mirroring my own dread. "It's not over," he whispered, confirming my deepest fear. "We may have weakened it, but Cypher will find a way back." And so, the fight was not over. The entity's presence lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness that had touched my life. I knew I would have to remain vigilant, ready to confront Cypher again if it ever returned. The battle was far from finished, and the shadows still held their secrets. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.